In 1958, deep within Kentucky's Appalachian Mountains, a secret so dark remained buried for decades. Established in that isolated region since the 19th century, the Blackwood family practiced traditions that challenged not only society's laws, but nature's own. This is the disturbing account of generations of consanguineous unions, resulting in one of the most impactful stories of human genetics ever documented on American soil. The Blackwoods lived on a remote 40-acre property, surrounded by dense vegetation and protected by steep escarpments that made access nearly impossible for strangers. They had developed a self-sufficient system, cultivating their own food and rarely descending to the neighboring town of Pine Creek, a community of only 800 inhabitants at the time. Sarah Jenkins, now 89 and one of the last living witnesses, describes what many in the region suspected. They came to town maybe twice a year to buy what they couldn't produce. Always the same man, Augustus Blackwood, with suspicious eyes and pale skin. He never brought the family. The Blackwood history in official records begins with Jeremiah Blackwood, who arrived in the region in 1871, fleeing legal problems in Virginia. Documents from the time show he was accompanied only by his sister cousin, who would later become his wife. Together, they established what would become a dynasty isolated by choice. At that time, marriage between cousins was not uncommon, especially in remote regions, explains Dr. Martin Calloway, a University of Kentucky geneticist who studied the Blackwood case. The problem arises when this pattern repeats for generations, exponentially increasing the risk of recessive genetic conditions manifesting. And that's exactly what happened to the Blackwoods. For almost 90 years, the family maintained a closed lineage, with marriages occurring exclusively among close relatives, brothers with sisters, parents with daughters, uncles with nieces, a web of relationships that created a progressively compromised genetic code. By 1958, when the story came to light, the family was in its fifth generation of consanguineous unions. The patriarch was Augustus Blackwood, great-grandson of Jeremiah, who controlled a property housing 27 people, all related in complex and proximate ways. The revelation occurred when a severe storm hit the region in March 1958. A flood destroyed part of the isolated road, forcing Augustus to seek medical help for injured family members. Dr. William Carter, then Pine Creek's only doctor, was called to accompany him back to the property. What he found there would forever change his perception of human capacity for isolation and the biological consequences of inbreeding. "I will never forget that day," Carter wrote in his diary, recovered in 1982 after his death. "The main house was large but decaying. Augustus took me to a converted barn where I found a young man of about 25 with a broken leg. But that is not what shocked me. It was his appearance, protruding, significantly retreated jaw, clenched fingers, and evident cognitive difficulty. While treating the injury, Dr. Carter noticed sounds from the barns upstairs. Augustus tried to dissuade him from investigating, but the doctor insisted. What he found on the second floor was described by him as a vision that will haunt me until my last days. 5 individuals, aged between 15 and 40, were confined in makeshift rooms. All had severe physical deformities, many were unable to speak or move with any limited mobility. Hygiene conditions were precarious, though there was evidence someone tried to keep them fed and minimally cared for. Make sure you're subscribed to this channel. The science behind these cases can reveal genetic secrets that impact all mankind's health, including yours. It is essential to understand how genetics shaped our evolution. When confronted, Augustus Blackwood initially reacted with hostility, but eventually revealed a disturbing story passed down for generations. According to him, the family believed they were purifying their blood through these unions, a distorted belief handed down as tradition. "My grandfather said that our blood was special, that it should not be mixed with that of strangers," Augustus explained to Dr. Carter. "When the first babies were born different, we believed it was just a temporary trial, that the next generations would be stronger." County records, though scarce, confirm part of this. Between 1871 and 1958, only 7 birth certificates were officially registered for the Blackwood family, an inconsistent number with the known size of the family. Subsequent investigations revealed many births occurred on the property without any official record, allowing the family to keep its most affected members completely hidden from public knowledge. Unregistered births allowed the Blackwoods to maintain those with the most severe deformities hidden from society, notes one report. These individuals never attended school, never received proper medical attention, and in many cases never left the property's limits. The Blackwood case represents one of the most extreme examples of documented voluntary genetic isolation in modern America, explains Dr. Eleanor Whitney, an anthropologist who studied the case in the 1970s. What makes this case particularly unique is that, unlike other isolated communities that occasionally practiced consanguineous marriages by necessity, the Blackwoods did so systematically and intentionally for almost a century. After the discovery, Dr. Carter faced a significant ethical and legal dilemma. Kentucky laws at the time prohibited marriages among close relatives, but intervention in isolated communities was complicated, especially since many adults on the property had never been officially recorded as citizens. After 3 days of deliberation, Carter reported the case to local authorities. Sheriff James Monroe, accompanied by 2 deputies, visited the property on April 2, 1958. The official report describes an extremely suspicious family with members who had clearly never interacted with strangers and a worrying situation that requires immediate intervention. The authorities' intervention led to the removal of 8 individuals from the Blackwood property, all with significant physical deformities and varying degrees of cognitive impairment. They were taken to Lexington Regional Hospital, where doctors documented their conditions. Dr. Howard Phillips, a geneticist who examined them in 1958, documented a series of conditions typical of highly endogamous populations: polydactyly, extra fingers, syndactyly, fusion of fingers, microcephaly, severe facial anomalies, and multiple mental deficits. What we are seeing here, Phillips wrote, is the manifestation of rare recessive genes that, in populations with greater genetic diversity, would remain dormant. Younger family members revealed equally disturbing aspects of life on the property. Martha, then 19 and one of the few who could communicate clearly, described how the most affected members were kept separated. Mom said it was to protect them, Martha explained to social workers. She said the world out there would be cruel to them. But I think it was more to hide them. Some of them I only saw when I carried food. The authorities faced an unprecedented situation. Most removed adults had no official documentation, no birth certificates, school records, or medical history. Legally, they did not exist. The case generated significant ethical debate. On one hand, the living conditions were clearly inadequate. On the other, the family had developed its own care system, however rudimentary. An external intervention represented a traumatic rupture for individuals who had never known another reality. The discovery of the Blackwoods exposed a flaw in our social system, says Dr. Richard Branson, a medical ethics expert. As a society, we assume certain practices are universally avoided. But this case shows that in sufficient isolation, communities may develop radically different norms with devastating consequences. In the following weeks, authorities mapped the complex Blackwood family structure. Augustus, then 47, was simultaneously cousin and half-brother to his wife, Eliza. Of the 9 children they had together, 3 had severe deformities and had been kept in the adapted barn. The investigation revealed this practice of separation began 2 generations prior, when the first obvious genetic problems appeared. Robert Blackwood, Augustus's cousin and one of the few who occasionally left the property for seasonal work, provided disturbing testimony. It started with my grandfather saying the family's blood was special, that we should keep our lineage pure. When babies began to be born different, he said it was a test of our faith, that perfect children would eventually be born. So we continued. District Attorney Richard Thornton initially considered criminal charges against the adults, but the situation was legally complex. Many practices began in previous generations when laws were less clear, and there was no evidence of intentional cruelty, only extreme ignorance and isolation. Media attention complicated matters further. When reports began to circulate, journalists from across the country converged on Pine Creek. The story, with its elements of isolation, inbreeding, and hidden family members, captured the American public's imagination. If you've heard about our history, pause a moment and consider the human suffering behind the sensational headlines. These are real people whose lives were shaped by terrible decisions they did not choose. Leave a comment with the word genetics to show you understand this case's seriousness. The Louisville Courier-Journal was the first to publish a detailed article on April 15, 1958, titled "Isolated Family Reveals Dark Genetic Secrets in Kentucky Mountains." The article brought the first public analysis of the case's scientific implications. Dr. James Richardson, a University of Louisville geneticist, explained, "What we see in the Blackwood case is a dramatic demonstration of the dangers of repeated consanguineous unions. Each generation increases the concentration of shared genes and the likelihood harmful recessive conditions manifest." The 8 individuals removed were eventually divided between medical institutions and temporary foster homes. For those with severe deformities and significant cognitive impairment, the future was uncertain at a time when care options were limited. The case prompted significant changes in Kentucky's social services policies regarding isolated communities. "We cannot allow another situation like the Blackwoods to develop without intervention," said Kentucky Governor A.B. Chandler in May 1958. The fate of those removed varied considerably. The 4 with the most severe disabilities were sent to the Pine Meadows State Institute. "They went from one type of isolation to another," said Dr. Whitney. "The difference is they now received proper medical care, but were still separated from mainstream society. For the younger and less severely affected, integration was attempted." Martha Ann Elizabeth Blackwood, placed in a Lexington foster home, eventually attended a special school. Martha, demonstrating remarkable intelligence despite limited education, later became an important voice warning of the dangers of consanguinity. In a rare 1978 interview at age 39, Martha reflected, "I grew up believing our way of life was normal, that the outside world was strange and dangerous. The transition was painful but necessary. Today I understand what happened was the result of ignorance and isolation, not evil." Scientifically, the Blackwood case became an object of study nationwide. In 1962, Dr. Phillips published a detailed analysis in the Journal of Medical Genetics. "The Blackwood case gives us an unprecedented opportunity to study the effects of extreme endogamy on humans," he wrote. Blood analyses confirmed a high degree of consanguinity, with patterns showing significantly more homozygosity than the general population, a clear marker of endogamy. A particularly disturbing aspect was the evidence that deformities had become progressively more severe over generations. Recovered photographs revealed a clear pattern of worsening physical anomalies. "What we are watching," Dr. Calloway explained in a 1965 symposium, "is the cumulative effect of inbreeding depression, the reduction of biological fitness due to increased homozygosity." 67 years after the initial discovery, the Blackwood legacy continues to reverberate. The original property was completely abandoned in the 1970s after Augustus's death. Today, it is only vegetation-invaded ruins. Martha Blackwood devoted much of her adult life to educating people about the dangers of consanguinity. Before her death in 2009, she helped establish a foundation offering genetic counseling for isolated Appalachian communities. "What happened to my family was not just a personal tragedy," she wrote in her 1990 memoirs. "It was a collective failure of education and social outreach that allowed people to live so marginally they could develop harmful practices without intervention." Advances in genetics provided deeper understanding. DNA analyses in 1992 confirmed the family's coefficient of inbreeding was among the highest ever documented in human populations. "What the Blackwood case taught us," explains Dr. Jennifer Reynolds, a Johns Hopkins University geneticist, "is that genetic diversity is not just an abstract concept, but a fundamental biological need." The case also changed how social services address isolated communities. The Kentucky program developed in response was later adapted by other states. "The challenge," explains Robert Thompson, current director of Kentucky's Department of Social Services, "is finding the balance between respecting community autonomy and ensuring harmful practices do not occur in isolation." The Blackwood case taught us that compassionate intervention may be necessary even when not requested. Today, few direct descendants who know their family history prefer to remain anonymous, fearing stigma. One descendant who requested anonymity shared, "I grew up without this story. When I discovered it at 19, it was a shock. I immediately sought genetic counseling. Since my grandfather married outside the family, my risk of carrying harmful conditions is no greater than the general population's. The Blackwood case remains a powerful reminder of the dangers of extreme isolation and ignorance of basic genetic principles. It highlights how distorted beliefs can perpetuate in closed communities, leading to practices that seem clearly harmful from the outside but are perceived as traditions from within. The story does not end with the Blackwoods, concludes Dr. Reynolds. Even today, in various parts of the world, communities exist where marriage between close relatives is common by cultural tradition, geographical isolation, or lack of knowledge. What we learned from the Blackwoods remains relevant and necessary. If you've watched this far, you like this story. Leave a comment saying I watched here so I can meet you and know who truly enjoys the stories here on the channel. Be sure to leave your like and share this with others interested in these historical and scientific accounts that reveal little-known aspects of human genetics. And remember to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our next investigations into cases science is still trying to fully understand.